We began these videos by talking about a common assumption about human dignity and have come quite a ways. Let's remember briefly before going on to two other basic ideas about culture. We defined culture and intercultural competence. We looked at theoretical models of intercultural competence development briefly. We proved that culture is real, looking at culture shock, the psychological implications of culture shock for the person's self, and looked at cultural anthropology's approaches to intercultural competence. Then we looked at several frameworks for understanding culture and applied them to real situations. Well, fictionally real situations. And now we're working towards intercultural competence attitudes and skills on our way to discussing virtues and some of my own approaches to a lifelong praxis. I've provided a heuristic, which is a method of learning or inquiry for learning and thinking about cultural and intercultural differences and conflicts. Intercultural competence comes in wherever one can perceive an intercultural conflict. Part of this involves thinking through the different levels at which the conflict is most evident. So now we can begin to look at the skills and attitudes part of our definition of intercultural competence. Another concept, which may have been mentioned, but which is worth looking at further now, is the concept of action chains that comes from Edward T. Hall once again. Action chains are expected behaviors that help us organize our interpretation of social behaviors. They are not prescribed, but expected. So Hall says that it is a sequence of events like a dance that help us reach a common goal. Each action in a chain is sequentially linked and forged through habit and experience. Every full action chain has a beginning, a climax, and an end, with a variety of intricate and necessary intermediate stages. The examples Hall gives are making breakfast, meeting someone new, becoming engaged and married, buying something in a store, and so forth. Each of these social exchange interactions is governed by an action chain. Can you think of any other examples? Pause it here and list some. How about buying something? Are you required to greet the person who is trying to sell you something? What happens if you don't greet the person? How do you greet them? Do you shake hands with the salesperson? How do you know whether you should or shouldn't shake hands with the clothes salesperson, for example? You tell someone what you're looking for, but do you expect to be able to haggle with them on the price? Is the price negotiable? Is negotiation expected? Think of another one. How about gift giving? We've talked about this in another presentation. Let's move on. What about meeting someone new that you are attracted to in a bar or at a party? Is there an action chain? What are you expected to say? How do you act and present yourself to get a positive outcome? Remember that all of these interactions and situations in your culture have equivalents in the second culture, but with entirely different expectations. That's why action chains are so important and so fraught and so important to intercultural competence and the skills. Whenever we cross cultures, we lose our ability to use all our familiar action chains. All of our unthought of, subconscious, habituated behaviors now have the potential to annoy others and be interpreted as offensive because we can go on automatic pilot when ordering a burger at a restaurant. Not so in a second culture. Just feeding yourself at a restaurant now in a second culture becomes a stressful event, especially if we are using a second language in that second culture. I remember how stressed I was in the post office in the Soviet Union trying to buy stamps for the first time. The action chain is the cultural ladder of inference. We perform the steps to climb the ladder and know what we'll get at the top. All of those inferred actions that we also expect of others follow the expected step up and up and up the ladder. We know what comes next because we perform the action chain a lot of times. The cultural ladder of inference follows an action chain of inference. It follows ODIEH, observe, describe, interpret, explain, hypothesize. You observe and describe what you see. The data is all the stuff that you notice. Then you add meaning, cultural meaning in your first culture. You make assumptions, draw conclusions, take action, and hypothesize, understanding what the other is doing. Not so when in a second culture, though. And this ladder of inference also describes the skills necessary for the interculturally competent person who enters another culture with a set of action chains and assumptions that need to be short circuited or will get short circuited whether you like it or not. If someone not from our culture fails to perform all the steps of our action chain, the interculturally competent person forgives them. But the non interculturally competent person, the interculturally incompetent person, takes offense. When you meet others in a second culture, most will not be interculturally competent. Therefore, be prepared for others to take offense at your failure to know and follow the action chains of the other's culture. But the person who can short circuit their own rush to judgment along the lines of the inferential action chains of cultural context has a very useful skill in intercultural spaces. Well, I use these videos as presentations for the courses I teach on intercultural competence. They're also freely available for anybody to watch. So please feel free to like it or subscribe to this channel as you see fit, or share it. Your feedback is valuable to me to make sure that things are clear. And may you find the peace you are looking for.